is started and let's go. So, for the people watching the recording, this is week 1 of the Carroll Mechanisms Community Research Call. This is a call between Philip and I working on the Carroll Mechanisms Research Project with a whole bunch of members of the community who are also participating. And so this is an experiment. We'll learn what the best format is for this kind of work. And for those of you who are really interested, please feel free to jump in with your comments in chat or by raising your hand. I think as a start, what I want to begin with, the ritual I want to start with is to remind ourselves why we do this by telling a story of governance failure that happened somewhere in the world. And so I think that it helps ground us in why we do this work. It's really important work to work on governance. The cost is measured in thousands of lives and the quality of thousands of lives, at least in this story that I'm going to tell you. Of course, the cost is much higher than that globally. But in this particular story, this is the story of the small farming town of Walkerton. It's a farming town of about 5,000 people. And there's this, it's very rural, and there's this man who has been put in charge of the water plant. The man has only a high school education, and the way that he ended up getting this job is his brother worked in the government, and so his brother just gave him the position. And the issue is that Stan is frequently he's skipping the water test that he says that he's doing. So instead of doing the water test every day like he's supposed to, he'll do them maybe every other day, sometimes just once a week or less. And when he sends in his results, he just copies the old results from the week before. So he's sending in false reports of the water test for over a decade. He does this. And everyone in the town is assuming that someone else is watching the water. And so they're like, well, you know, there's a ministry that is receiving the report, so it must be the ministries that are doing it. And the ministry assumes that it's the local government that's doing it because they have a good relationship with Stan. And in fact, one of the issues is that the local government loves Stan because A, he has friends there, and B, he keeps costs really low. Of course, the way he keeps costs low is by not doing his job. And so the provincial government is like, well, we're not having any water problems, so I guess we don't need to do inspections, right? And so they cut their inspections. Finally, the perfect storm, in a literal sense, happens, where really heavy rains wash through and pick up the cattle manure of the farming town, and it goes into a shallow well. And then in the well, the E. coli, it seeps into the water supply, contaminating it. And by May 15th, all kinds of people start getting sick, violently sick, diarrhea, adults getting diarrhea that causes them to collapse. Children are vomiting blood, and the hospital completely overflows. But the health officials, when they come to ask Stan about the water quality, he's like, no, everything's fine. No problems. He, in fact, did tests, and he found out that there was contamination, but he continued to lie because he was terrified that he would get caught because he'd been lying for over a decade. And so while people are dying, Stan continued to lie for 5 days. 5 days where people could have been saved by being told that the water was unsafe. Finally, a child dies, and this is like the tipping point for the province to intervene. They do independent testing, they find the contamination, and then they cut off the water supply, and then they introduce proper cleaning measures. In the process, one child died, and 2,300 people were seriously ill which is half the town. Remember, it's only 5,000 people in the town. So half the town got seriously ill, and 7 were dead. And many people ended up with permanent kidney damage from the E. coli. So the irony, of course, is that Stan, he covered this up to try and protect himself, but because of that, he went from being an incompetent employee to becoming a criminal, and he went to prison for many years. And so the story, though, is not necessarily one about Stan. Of course, like a moral can be taken, which is when you are wrong, say that you are wrong. This is one of my this is why I picked this story. This is a favorite of mine, but really this is a structural problem. So someone unqualified was hired. There's no oversight. Budget cuts caused there not to be sufficient machinery, and then a culture of cover-ups meant that he could get away with the lies for a long time. So in this story, bad governance cost 7 dead, including a baby, 23 seriously ill. Jamelia has a story in chat. Reminded me when Soviet Union papers withheld critical information about the Chernobyl disaster. Didn't evacuate people until several days after. Maybe that will be next week's governance disaster. Here on Carroll Mechanisms community call, live weekly. Okay, that's our story time for today. Thank you for coming. That's a wrap. See you next week. No, just kidding. Now I think we'll get to work. So Philip has on Thursday we had the opportunity, you and I, to sit down and chat a little bit and answer some high-level questions. And then I know that you are just beginning the process of mathematically framing Carroll mechanisms and beginning to investigate their properties. I think that's where we're hoping to pick up today.
Good. So I'm going to share, I'll talk a little bit, and then I'll share my iPad screen so I can whiteboard a little bit, and we can talk through some diagrams. Just to catch everybody else up a little bit, Connor and I had a good conversation last week where we talked about this kind of dual question of what's a good small model to work on, and then what are the right questions that we need to ask about the model. And so one of my main things that when I try to set up a model is I try to make it complex enough to capture real things. So I don't want it to be oversimplified to the point of just being kind of silly and trivial. So I need it to be somewhat complex, but I also need it to be as simple as I can get it, because if you have a very complex model, it can be very difficult to understand which pieces are affecting what. And so we have a really strong, scientific push, I guess, towards having simple models so that we can understand them well. And so the question here is kind of what's the smallest piece of this Carroll mechanisms, or maybe even the smallest kind of use case for Carroll mechanisms that needs to work, and let's make our model like represent that smallest piece that needs to work. So I want to do some sketching with Connor here in a second to kind of talk through, refine further kind of what's that smallest piece that needs to work. And so I don't want it to be so small that it doesn't ever actually happen in the real world. But if I can find a kind of a small use case for Carroll mechanisms that's big enough that it actually does exist, that actually will be, used in the real world, now that's a great place to start, because if it doesn't work on something small, like if Carroll mechanisms don't work on something small, I don't know why we would believe they would work on something big. And so they better work on something small, and then small is amenable to analysis, the kind of analysis that I'm going to try to do. So that's the first kind of piece is what's the right small model. and I'll start sketching that in a moment. Then the second piece is what are the right questions? Kind of what's the minimal set of questions we need to ask about this thing? Where if we get no's to these questions, that like tells us we need to completely kind of reframe the way we're thinking about this. And so I don't know that we'll spend as much time talking about those questions today, but one of the main questions that I asked Connor last week was I think I called it, are we studying this with what I'll call payoff neutral agents, or with agents that have vested interest in the outcomes of governance decisions? And we landed on we need to study it on agents that have vested interest in the outcome of governance decisions. This might seem like a strange question for me to ask, because it feels a little bit obvious that we need to study this in terms of like making sure the incentives work for agents that have vested interest in governance decisions. So for example, in Connor's water example, the question was, Stan did not actually have a vested interest in governance decisions. He didn't own shares in like a water testing company or a aquifer cleanup company or something like that. So he was actually payoff neutral. All he wanted was just to avoid work for himself. He was basically just being lazy in not doing the water tests over the years. But in many cases, there's scenarios where people try to influence governance who do have a vested interest in governance decisions. And so that people with vested interest way more complicates the analysis. But we decided it's probably important enough to understand how people with vested interests interact with the mechanisms that we need to keep that inside the fence of the questions that we're talking about. So in terms of the questions, this is probably the last thing I'll say about this today, but the questions that we're asking will be focusing on people interacting with the mechanism who have vested interests in the outcomes of the mechanisms. In contrast to someone who is actually more neutral, like Stan, someone who's just lazy. Now we're thinking about, cigarette companies that are publishing only the pro-cigarette research because they want to sell cigarettes, right? Mm-hmm. Anything you want to jump in on that with, Connor, before I start sketching?
Yeah, maybe two things to say. One is to talk about prediction markets as a analog to this research, because typically in prediction markets we assume neutral agents. It's kind of like if you look at most of the publications, including the publication that resulted in the research that built Uniswap, the assumption is all the agents that are participating in these markets, they're not motivated agents. So they're actually trying to accurately get to a real assessment of something. But we know
all they care about is making a profit on their trades in the prediction market, essentially.
Yep.
They don't care about whether it resolves yes or no. They just care about making money in the prediction market.
Yep, that's right.
It's kind of what we mean by a neutral agent.
Yeah. But we know that some prediction markets, like some people try to leverage prediction markets to achieve certain outcomes. And an example of this is because prediction markets have signal value, like they tell you what's popular, and because what's popular can influence what people vote for. In presidential elections, it's common for campaigns to have a budget set aside for influencing prediction markets. And arguably, this is also something so there's good evidence that this happened during the, I think it was Mitt Romney versus Obama in the US. And there's also good evidence that this is something that Elon did in the Trump versus Kamala elections, where it matters so much how popular something is that it's actually worth spending money to get that signal value in order to give people the impression that something's more popular or more likely. So even in the context of prediction markets, this assumption of payoff neutral agents might not be true. And definitely in the case of governance, arguably governance, it is the study of the interaction between agents who have vested interests, because they're each trying to get their way on something, some policy that they care about.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
All right. Let me sketch.
Let's draw some pictures.
Hunter, do you have I asked you this last week, do you have a favorite use case parable for
Oh, I should have been working
Carroll
on
mechanisms?
it.
If not, I'll just borrow something from the proposal, and it may not fit perfectly, but we can go with it.
Does anyone in chat have one of a? Oh, somebody did a really fun one with me the other day. They said it was really a spicy take. It was something like schooling. I often find that something being actually controversial, but kind of low stakes, is a good property for it to have, because then people have more to say. What's something somewhat controversial, but
That's an interesting needle to thread. Controversial but low stakes.
yeah, where like collecting accurate information actually matters. Is MSG harmful? That's kind of fun, but I don't know anything about it. Is organic food worth it? That's pretty good. But it's not really a governance decision. Should be a policy or governance. Schooling? Maybe like when to start school start times. Oh, negative income taxes. Is that like UBI? Negative income taxes is a brilliant way to rebrand UBI. That's the case. All right, let's do school start times. So
Okay.
School should start
at 9 in the morning. Is that too bland? At noon.
Let's say like 9 a.m. start.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to call this proposition P. School start at 9. All right. So this is my point that we'll establish a prediction market on this point P.
Mm-hmm.
And yes shared, if I say yes, if I buy yes shares, that means I believe school should start at 9. If I buy no shares, school should not start at 9. Is that fine?
Yep.
All right. What's a counterpoint that can come for here?
So obviously it has its direct inverse, which I don't know.
So I could
if you
buy
want.
no shares, sure, sure, but that happens in the existing prediction market, right? School should not start at 9.
We have let's say yes, it happens in the prediction market, sure.
I mean, I'm open to whatever, just trying to make sure that what we put makes sense.
I think
so
it should.
I mean, okay, so this is a regular old. We're thinking of this as a regular old prediction market at the beginning, and then we'll.
Yeah, I think it's fine to call it a prediction market for now, but like what we're aiming to make it is a favor market, and so that it's actually accounting for, because you can't actually predict on something that's a policy option.
That's right. Yeah.
What's the resolution source for the market? Good question, Brian. Antoine, go ahead.
Yeah, so for me the question is not so much the prediction market here, but the arguments, because what is going to make the difference are the arguments why it should start at 9 and why it shouldn't. So actually it's not about a prediction market about is the price of X being over or under. So it's not, you can't resolve it with mathematics. You have to resolve it through people's preferences and arguments, which are different nature and different kind. So the real discussion is behind the question.
Yeah, that's right. Do you want to take that, Philip, or do you want me to?
I can. I'll say a thing and then kick it to you. I mean, I think the idea is that Carroll mechanisms provide a mechanism for discussing this, like for something that looks like resolution for this proposition here.
Mhm.
Does that seem like a reasonable thing to say, Connor?
Yeah, that the intention of Carroll mechanisms is to equip markets with the ability to reason. And so the way that we do that is exactly what we're about to diagram here, but that you have your point, you have your counterpoint, which is your argument against something, and that's actually a reason that you're giving. And so maybe we can
write down a counterpoint
and
say, okay.
There's a couple of options. We could talk about biology, so that it's better for children. We could talk about better academic outcomes. We could talk about reduction in mental health issues.
Does the counterpoint, I mean, I was thinking about a counterpoint as being here's like something that if I think school should start at 9, a counterpoint ends up looking like something that if it were true, I would change my mind, like a reason to change my mind. Is that the right way to think about this?
Yep.
So,
and it could be that it has already changed your mind, right?
Sure.
You think it's true.
Yeah, but then it would be an odd. Yeah, sure. Right.
And what's going to be persuasive to each person is different, but like for me, maybe I'll give my counterpoint. School. Well, go ahead.
I can easily think of counterpoints that would make sense for school starting at 6. Like I could say, I think like school shouldn't start at 6 if it makes the kids walk to school more dangerous or something like that. Like, because it's dark in the morning. It's dark that early in the morning.
Big one is for working parents.
Sure.
Who drive their kids to school is very inconvenient.
To have the very early. Yeah.
And so it's maybe it imposes to do later.
Have the very late. Okay.
So that could be a counterpoint to school should start at 9. Be something like inconvenient for working parents, or maybe even prohibitively inconvenient for low-income working parents.
Yeah. So if I say, so this is school should up here should start at 9, and then the counterpoint is a 9 o'clock school start excludes low-income working parents from the education system, something like this. A 9 a.m. start bad for low-income families. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Does it do what we want in terms of being lower ambiguity? Probably.
I think so.
I think it does, yeah.
And maybe we should explain what we mean by lower ambiguity.
Ambiguity, right. So I'm going to draw an arrow here. This is how I'm thinking about the network, is that this counterpoint is somehow an independent so let's see, whether a 9 a.m. start is bad for low-income families is independent of school actually starting at 9 or not. Like this counterpoint is kind of an independent claim from a logical dependence standpoint, independent from the point I wrote up on the top. So I'll draw the arrow pointing to what do I say? Pointing from independent to dependent. Like if the counterpoint is true, then that means that we probably shouldn't decide in favor of P. That would be one reason not to decide in favor of P. So one of the cool things about these particular statements we wrote down is that P, the statement school should start at 9, it has a lot of ambiguity. Like there's a lot of discussion and argument and stuff that would need to go into adjudicating that claim. Like that word should is open to a lot of interpretation. Whereas the counterpoint, a 9 a.m. start time is bad for low-income families, would be easier to measure. It'd be easier to actually like say, oh yes, these are the specific reasons why this thing is would resolve to true or false. Is that a decent way to explain that, Connor?
Mm-hmm.
The ambiguity.
Antoine is taking off, and he says the topic is interesting. It's the very topic he's working on in the Citizens Assembly work in France.
Nice.
And so there's a real life case going on exactly this.
Nice.
Crazy, no? And chronobiologists told us in the first session that 9 a.m. is the time. Before that, children until 11, they just can't function. It's not in the waves of the brain, but it's we have adapted all the timing to the timing of the working life and workforce. So children have to go to school at 8, which is actually in terms of learning quite something completely crazy. But that's the debate going on within the group of citizens.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to run, but thanks, and I will look at the rest of the call after.
Great.
Thanks,
Antoine.
So that's great.
Okay.
Okay. So this partially answers your question, Brian. You asked what's the resolution source for this market, and the resolution source is the thing to notice is that the upper market, the point P, is unresolvable on its own. It requires these counterpoints underneath it that are closer to resolvable. And so actually what we mean by low ambiguity is that it's more resolvable. Now, you can keep going more and more and more and more resolvable.
I could put like a specific experiment outcome down here or something like that would inform the counterpoint. Yeah.
And then at that very bottom level, what we imagine happens is that there's a consensus mechanism in the same way that there's a consensus mechanism in Ethereum, where people say, did this result show this thing? Did this experiment show this thing? And it's much easier to say, to run the statistics on a particular experiment and say yes or no than it is to answer broad, in high level terms, should we start at 9? So an example would be, maybe we should do one layer deeper. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, sure. That's fine. I want to make sure that we get to how we think about arrows also before we get too far.
Then
Another layer deeper would be we run an experiment. We run some kind of controlled experiment, and then it has a testable hypothesis, and then and a result, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right. So the arrows. Oh, go ahead.
Let me add a little onto that, which is that the way that governance tends to happen right now is that every locale, wherever that city is, they just try and do whatever is considered best practice, which is really suboptimal from a collective perspective. What we want from a collective perspective is we want all kinds of locales using the fact that they have governance agency to try different things in systematic ways so that we find out what works well, and then that can propagate back up. This is of course why nations are often subdivided into provinces or states. It's so that you can have that regional diversity, and things that are working on a regional level then can go to the national level. So for example, in the US, marijuana legalization started in Colorado and then it spread everywhere because it seemed to be working, at least the way it was implemented. And so we need, we want this to happen more. And a lot of times it doesn't actually happen. And it doesn't propagate back up the stack. In Scroll, we want this to happen. We want different DAOs or different groups to try different things, and if it's working, then we want more of it. We want it to expand. Okay, go ahead. Arrows.
Good. Okay, so the arrow. So yeah, how do we talk about this now? So if these are both some kind of a market, some kind of a prediction market looking thing, I can buy yes shares in either P or in CP, but we also want to endow this mechanism set with the ability to kind of tune how strong that arrow is. So what I might come to this interaction and I might say, I believe schools should start at 9, and I don't think that a 9 a.m. start time would let's see, is relevant to this. Does that make sense? Is that how I would think about this? So like this thing here, the link has some kind of a weight associated with it, and I think that in the proposal we called it Q. I'll just stick with that for now. There's some kind of a weight here, and if Q, we can just kind of put some limits on this. If Q is 0, then it's like there's no arrow. It's like these are two independent claims. And if Q is really, really big, then that means something like a yes resolution on the counterpoint should be really bad. Like should tell us not to start at 9. And if Q is really, really negative, then it might mean the opposite thing. It might mean that a yes resolution on the counterpoint would mean we actually should start at 9. So
yeah, that's right.
If you hate low income people, you might think Q should be a low number, like a negative number. Does that make sense, Connor, to have the negative and the positive and to sort of be thinking about it as able to talk about both positive and negative correlation?
Interesting.
Or does it need to be just the strength of positive correlation, in this case of negative correlation?
Whenever I had thought about this,
no, I think your documents, basically your write-ups in the past have thought of it as it just like tunes the strength of negative correlation, but doesn't flip you to positive. Yeah.
Alex asks, how many counterpoints would you attach to the first point / proposal? So they can be unlimited, Alex, but then there are methods that participants in the market can use to kind of group them together so they act cohesively. And that probably means, as with all things, eventually you run out of relevant things to say that would actually change your mind. So how many arguments can we actually come up with for why school should start at 9 or not? It's probably a limited number. But it's in theory it's unlimited, and the reason that it doesn't matter if it's unlimited is because even if you have duplicates, this is about how much capital is invested. It's not about the number of points. So actually, you're better off focusing really narrowly on a handful of informative counterpoints, rather than spreading your capital out over many irrelevant or like less informative points. Good question. Keep the questions coming in chat. So far, this has been nice, the kind of combination of chat, questions, and discussion here.
Yeah.
So, so far I've been thinking that Q can only be positive. And the reason I think that is because I'm worried about adversarial attacks where somebody makes a really highly irrelevant counterpoint, and then everybody agrees that it's irrelevant, and they flip the sign super negative, and then they use that to boost the influence of of the point.
It's good to have an extreme outcome being irrelevant. Like the two extremes are highly relevant in a defined direction, and the other extreme is totally irrelevant.
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Good. Red.
Oh, but I see what you're saying. So you're saying, but you could, so I've arbitrarily put the point of irrelevance at 0, and you're saying you could put the point of irrelevance at -infinity.
Oh, sure. That's in the math. That'll be fine. I don't care which way that goes. The question is one extreme high positive correlation and the other extreme high negative correlation, and irrelevance is in the middle, or is one extreme? Oh, I love Alex's question. Is one extreme high positive correlation and the other extreme no correlation? And I think I see why you're saying one extreme, the other extreme should be no correlation.
Yeah,
that makes perfect sense to me.
Mhm.
All right, so
So the direction of the relationship is encoded in kind of the graph topology, which things are connected to which things, and then it's only the strength of that relationship that's encoded in the Q.
yeah, okay.
And
Good.
I'll make a little mini quibble here, which is I'm concerned about saying correlation because we know that correlation is not necessary for causation, and that correlation is not sufficient for causation.
Right.
So really we're talking about causal relevance here.
Yep. No, that's totally true. I'm going to put causation until I pick a better word.
Sure.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Yep. Right. Causation's harder to measure than correlation, which is part of why this mechanism set is being proposed. Okay, good. So Alex, I think it was you said, why don't we put a prediction market on Q? That's basically the plan. And the question is, how do you make sure that works? Because there can be lots of naive ways of doing that don't work and lead people to place bets they don't believe in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so Connor, real quick, when I was talking to you last week, I drew this diagram, and I want you to critique this diagram. So I said, this is a point, this is a counterpoint, this is an objection. And so what I was imagining was that each of the, let me call this arrow CP. O is no good as a symbol. I'm going to call the objection B. I'll use the second letter. So CP is the arrow that points from C to P. This circle here, the circle on the right that's called B. So this arrow would be called BCP. Does this diagram make sense? And if so, where are the markets? So I know I have a market here. I know I have a market here. Do I have a market here? Or is that handled by the market here?
You have a market on B. And then
so, and B is the statement, something like, tell me, what is the state in our parable? What's B? If it's bad for low-income families, then we shouldn't start at 9. Is that what B?
Yeah. So, I mean, remember when you said, I don't care about low-income families?
Yeah.
That would be an example of an objection. And let's make it make sense. We can say, there aren't low-income families in this district.
Okay. So let me say B. There are no low-income families. Okay. So Okay, that makes sense. And another example would be there are good transportation options, good public transportation options.
That's good. Yep.
So basically any state, okay, so if B resolves to yes, that should weaken the strength of the arrow from C to P.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow the zero value for Q, like if B resolves to yes, that should make Q equal 0.
Yep.
So that sounds to me like the thing I've drawn down on the bottom would be possibly the same as the thing I drew up on the top if I just put a market on the arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Is that possibly right?
Where CP and B are involved in a market. Yeah.
Where the market on the arrow is just B. Is the market on B. Here's the question. I'm saying, let me make this low ambiguity. So the question is there a market on CP?
Could you repeat what CP
Independent
is?
somehow of the market. So CP is the relationship between the counterpoint and the point. So
Mhm.
it's the actual link.
So
And
Q?
it's so that's right. So Q is sort of like the measurement of how strong that link is.
Mhm.
We want to use some market mechanism to figure out what that, like what Q is, what the number Q is, how strong that link should be. And so it like there's two possibilities, I think. One is there's a market on B, no market on CP, no market on the link itself because the market on B handles it. And the other option is there's somehow two, and I don't know what that would look like.
Okay.
My guess is it's just the market on B, and I don't have to I have if I want to put a market on an arrow, I draw a node and maybe I
Right.
can just draw a node on that arrow. And I if I have more arrows pointing at that node, then I have deeper reasoning chains that affect that. But
So I'll tell you how I think about it, and then we can. I think about it as CP is itself a market, which in the same way that P is mediated with its relationship with C, CP is modified with B. And so CP is a market. It has to be because it's now our point. In air quotes. Like we can just transpose the problem and we can see that CP is itself a market that then is modified where it's the Q between CP and B comes from B quantity CP.
So would it be okay that, I mean, it feels to me like, okay, if I draw this diagram down here, this is actually a decent way. If I draw this diagram down here, what that is doing is it's giving me this new arrow. Then now I need a new market for it. I need something to define the Q now for that new arrow, which leaves a loose end. And I'd love to pose this problem in a way that doesn't leave a loose end. So another way to think about it is B doesn't live independent of that arrow. B is just defined directly on the arrow. And we think of B as its own independent claim. That is the source, the data source, if you want, for the strength of the Q relevance parameter. And then there's, because, yeah, go ahead and think about it for a second.
So what that won't allow us to easily do Okay, so we have a market that's on the edge. People can now participate in the market. The market is directly defining the queue. It means that if someone takes a counter position to it, whatever their contravening reason is, it's all absorbed into that market. So it's not distributed among multiple different points.
But
and
it
also,
it could be. I mean, so that's what this diagram, the diagram in the lower half, that's what that now, like now, if down in the lower diagram, CP is a market, then B is an objection to, like CP says that C is relevant to P. I can say I don't think CP is relevant to P because of something, or I can just say I don't think it's relevant to P.
Mhm.
Like
Oh,
I
that's
don't have to give a justification. I can just play the market. If I want to give a justification, now I need another link. But I'm
yeah.
wondering if the minimal example problem we need to look at doesn't actually include someone giving a reason for their objection,
Hmm.
and it just has people with the ability to object.
I think that's right.
Because then the queue is still endogenous. So last week I mentioned something like that, like just a point and a counterpoint, and you were like, well, then the queue is still exogenous, but it doesn't have to be. The queue can still be defined by a market.
Mm-hmm. It can
If
just
I
be given.
kind of have this diagram, yeah.
Sure. That seems nice. So the reason that, let me think about that a little more.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that seems really nice to reason about. It is something we want to avoid from a user experience perspective. We really want to, we always talk about charging a fee for negativity, and the fee for negativity is you have to give a reason. So at least in the markets that we're considering right now, the edge, it sort of doesn't become a market until someone offers a counterpoint. So there's kind of
So
only
this,
yes shares that you can buy, which are then taken into account.
I see. Yeah, sure. So this
Here.
edge doesn't show up until I say, so let's see. Interesting. So, okay, now keep going. You said there's only yes shares you can buy until someone
On CP, until someone offers a
defines.
counterpoint, and then you buy the shares in that counterpoint. You're not actually buying shares in no.
Okay.
And that way, this is one of our methods of eliciting latent knowledge, right? One of our methods
Yeah.
of getting to reveal their reasons. Now, someone could just make an objection that says, no, you should not do X, Y, or Z, but we're relying on epistemic leverage to give us to make it so that that one doesn't have very much influence because it's not lower ambiguity.
Okay.
Right. So
okay.
We've kind of left the audience behind here because we haven't talked about epistemic leverage yet, but
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this is all fine, and I just want to make sure that I have as good of a brain dump from you as I'm putting math to this later this week. So you're saying like these markets aren't really yes and no markets. No's come from the no's come from people buying shares in counterpoints. And you can't, like, to have a counterpoint, you need to have something disputable that relates those, some relevance thing that relates those two.
Yeah. Especially I think this is true for objections. And so I would be really comfortable if let's see. It's only recently that in our UX, we actually automatically create the inverse of a point. And we actually created it manually as a separate point that's connected and then assumed to be
Okay.
to be relevant because it's
I see.
but it's created by an AI, so it might not actually be relevant, and it should still be disputable. I just don't know. Maybe we could say that every statement has its own negation, and that's like a safe thing to do. But it's not something we've done so far.
Okay. I would love to start from whatever is understood the best right now, and have that be the starting point. I think that would make a lot of sense. So I don't need to modify what you're doing right now.
Well, but in practice, it just creates more steps for users to create the inverse, link the inverse, say that the inverse is relevant, right? So it seems fine to have a point that says school should start at 9, and then to automatically have the inverse of that be something that you can buy, because you know that people are going to want to do that. The thing is that, and this is actually a good example for exactly this reason, and I'm time sensitive here, so it's now on the hour. Who needs to drop, feel free. This can operate not only as a, not all questions are binary questions where it's like yes or no. They can be categorical. And so someone could be saying school should start at 9, and somebody else can be saying that school should start at noon, right? And someone else can be saying that school should start at 6. And all of these are in competition with one another. And if somebody said school should start at 9:15, well, actually the degree of opposition between the people at 9 and the people at 9:15 is very low. So you might find that actually those get clumped together, and then there's like there's a discussion to be had among the 9 and the 9:15ers about which one to pick, but together they're on a team against the 6 a.m.ers and the noon people. And so this is actually why we didn't make these markets naturally have
I see.
sides.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So if you were to think about the graph that connects 9, 6, and noon, they would each negatively impact every individual one of those would negatively impact the other two. But there's no inverse relationships.
That's right.
Just 9 going up makes the other two go down, but 9 going down need not make
9 going down would help both of the others.
Would help both of the others. Yeah. Okay. So it's sort of split. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And then it would kind of be the job of people who didn't want noon or 6, that they would go and attack those other ones. Or they would use epistemic leverage. So it could be, this could be a nice little sub problem if you want to just do it on. It could be that there's a really elegant way for all these to link up all these binary markets instead of having them be unary. And like if all markets have 2 sides and I draw a line from the yes of P to the yes of C, I'm sorry, the inverse, the yes of C to the yes of P, then maybe it's really easy to figure out what should happen with all the no shares of C, given a change in the yes of P. I don't know. But for once again, as an attempt to simplify, we kind of we tried to drop that.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. So just trying to resolve a bit before we drop.
A problem though that we face with this approach is that it's highly recursive. So you keep ending up, there's always a deepest queue, right? That then start at the deepest queue and then you use that to propagate back up the stack. then when I've implemented algorithms that rely on this principle, that's exactly what they do, is they find the deepest queue in the stack, and then they traverse the graph up, kind of like carrying the information with them. And this requires you to have an algorithm that works from the bottom up to the top to carry that information, which is, of course, the thing we're trying to design here. So as like a coarse grain, that allows us to start with something that has all endogenous properties, and then potentially to pivot out to an algorithm for defining the queue, which then, or a mechanism for defining queue, which then we can use recursively. Maybe it makes sense to make both P and C markets,
Right.
and to make CP a market, and just start with that. And CP then, having a market on CP implicitly gives us our B, because buying no shares in CP is buying the objection B. Yes, B.
Yeah.
Alex, you have a question?
Yes. Maybe this is not the moment nor my fully understanding, but I have a weird reaction with objections being a market, because basically, first of all, I think one important thing about putting an objection is that you would need to like justify it with facts. So for example, if you say like there is a good public transportation, so low-income families won't have a problem, you would need to prove that, because maybe you're talking from your neighborhood and low-income families could say like, no, it's not. So I think there's an importance of who can put objections. But then once you prove it's true, like I have a conflict with it being a popularity contest, because objections is also a warning or experience that someone might have, but maybe it's not something that it's common in the population. So people can bet that that is not a problem because they don't have it, but that doesn't make it less true.
Right.
So I think a different approach could be that basically objections by getting proved would change the queue number by itself without people needing to participate in a market or something around that. Because you need to, in a way, express that any point of view is valid, no matter if it's popular or not.
That's right. This is a really, I mean, this is the key. You said the most important thing. And I'm curious, Philip, how you'll respond. My intuition is that is the right, my intuition is to say, this is the right concern to have. And we think we have, like, this is the whole reason we've designed this in this way, is because we think we have a way to make it behave in exactly that way, Alex, where any perspective is capable of having influence, as long as it's grounded in evidence. And so that makes it not a popularity contest, but something much deeper. And my sense is that given the time, that might be the exact subject to tackle in our community call next Monday, where we'll likely, at that point, be talking about epistemic leverage, inshallah. And so then we can make this week, we analyze this simple market structure, and then next week, kind of the subject of our explanation will be, okay, we've got this set up, but we know that the problem with markets is that you have there's a potential risk of a popularity contest, and then there's the further question of, okay, well then how do you resolve that? How do you resolve the question or the objection? And it seems like we've just created more questions for ourselves. We started with a high-level point: should schools start at 9 a.m.? Now we have this objection, which says there are no low-income families that live here. Now, how do we resolve that question? And that is the moment that we can begin to frame the role of epistemic leverage in answering that.
Yeah. Yeah. To just give my quick take on Alex, your question, I agree with Connor. That's a deeply important question, and in many ways, that's what I'm here for, is to verify one way or another if it's possible to get around to avoid making this a popularity contest. Because you could absolutely imagine that you set up some complex mechanism, and what happens is the complexity allows for people to game it in complicated ways that result in it not being an improvement on other approaches. That kind of thing is super common, as we all know. So, so that's the kind of thing I'm trying to look for.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everyone. This is a great first kickoff call, our first community working session. It was so valuable to have you all here. I wasn't exactly sure what it was going to be like, and I was also so surprised by how many people came. Thank you all for coming.
It's more here today than there were last week.
Yeah, no, we're growing. Hopefully, it was entertaining.
Start a podcast.
That's right. We'll try and wear funny hats next time to keep you smiling. This has me really inspired that this is a good choice, and you're also a really excellent community. And thank you for your thoughts, questions, and messages in chat. And we look forward to seeing you. Well, I look forward to seeing you on Thursday for the proposal bonanza. We're going to be looking at the EOC together, and I might have a special treat for you then as well. So come prepared, and then for the rest of you who are going to be here next week, that we'll have another working session on Monday, hopefully with some results from what we framed today.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, afternoon, evening. Peace, love. Ciao.